I pretended to lose everything after my business partner stole from me and left me with nothing. My son, the software engineer, said he was too busy with a product launch. My daughter said her husband didn't think it was appropriate. But my youngest, a fourth-grade teacher who drove a 12-year-old truck and split groceries with coupons, he cleared out his living room and told me I was home. And when my attorney walked through that apartment door with a manila folder and the real number, the looks on their faces were something I will carry to my grave. Thank you for being here with me today. Before we go any further, take a moment and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read more than you might expect. And just so you know, some elements of this story have been adjusted for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to specific people or places is coincidental. But everything this story is about is completely real. The house in Scottsdale had 5 bedrooms and a pool I hadn't used in 3 years. My wife Patricia had wanted that pool. She said our grandchildren would swim in it one day. Patricia passed from pancreatic cancer 6 years ago, and the grandchildren we were supposed to have were still hypothetical, living somewhere in the future of children who were too busy to visit. I was 67 years old. I had built Mercer Development Group from a single office in Phoenix into a regional construction and real estate company worth $78 million, 400 employees, projects across Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico. By any measure the world uses to score a life, I had won. But on a Tuesday evening in October, sitting alone at a dining table built for 8, eating reheated pasta I had made 2 days ago, I understood something no balance sheet had ever shown me. I had spent 40 years building something impressive and somehow forgotten to build something that mattered. My oldest, Nathan, called at 7:15. He was a senior software engineer at a tech firm in Seattle, 41 years old, pulling in close to $300,000 a year. I had helped him with the down payment on his house in Bellevue, $350,000, a gift when he and his wife Claire moved in. He called maybe once a month, usually when something needed discussing. Dad, hey, quick question. His voice had the quality of a man multitasking. Dad, I've been looking at a tech investment opportunity. A friend of mine is launching a cybersecurity startup, and the early round closes Friday. I need to move fast. I'm thinking of putting in $200,000, but I could use another $100 from you to get a better equity position. I asked him how Claire was doing. Fine. Busy. The kids? Growing fast. Could I come up for Thanksgiving this year? He exhaled the way people do when they're doing the math on a request. Dad, Claire's parents are coming in from Portland. It's going to be a full house already, maybe Christmas. But about the investment, the window really is closing Friday. I told him I'd think about it. We said goodbye the way you do when there's nothing underneath the words. My daughter Diane called 30 minutes later from her house in Naperville, outside Chicago. She had married a finance director named Greg 8 years ago. I had paid for the wedding $240,000 and helped them with a down payment on their house the following year. Diane worked part-time at an interior design firm and spent the rest of her time on things she described as managing the household. Daddy, she said, her voice carrying that particular brightness I had come to recognize. You know how Greg and I have been talking about the lake house in Michigan? The one in Harbor Springs? Well, we put in an offer and it was accepted, but we're short on the closing costs. It's only $80,000. I know it's not a lot for you, but we need it by the end of the month. I asked if she and Greg would want to come to Scottsdale for the holidays this year. Daddy, you know how Greg feels about the heat. We'll try to get out there in the spring, I promise. But the closing date is the 28th. Can we count on you? I told her I would let her know. She said she knew I would come through. The way you say something to someone you've already decided is obligated to you. We hung up. I sat there for a long time after that. $200,000 for a startup. $80,000 for a lake house. No one had asked how I was sleeping. No one had asked if I was still going to my doctor. No one had asked if I ever got lonely in a 5-bedroom house designed for a family that existed mostly in memory. The third call came at 9 o'clock. It was my youngest, Kevin, 36 years old, 4th-grade teacher at a public school in Tucson. His wife Rosa worked as an assistant manager at a grocery store. They lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of town. I had paid for Kevin's teaching degree $48,000, the smallest investment I had made in any of my children's education. Kevin had never asked for anything beyond that. Not once. "Hey, Dad. Sorry for calling late. You doing okay?" His voice was unhurried. He wasn't multitasking. "Just checking in," he said. "Rosa and I were talking about you today, actually. We drove past a house in the Rincon Valley that reminded us of the one you and Mom had when we were little. The one with the saguaro out front. You remember that one? We talked for 40 minutes. About his students. About a boy named Marcus who was struggling with reading and how Kevin had been staying after school twice a week to work with him. About Rosa's mother visiting from Albuquerque. About a hiking trail they had found in the Catalinas. About nothing important and everything that was real. When we hung up, I sat in the quiet for a long time, and something that had been forming slowly in the back of my mind came fully into focus. I called my attorney, a man named Frank Okafor, who had been handling my legal affairs for 22 years. "Frank," I said, "I need your help with something unusual, something you're going to try to talk me out of." He did try to talk me out of it. Twice. "Harold," he said, "you're 67 years old. You have a heart condition you manage with medication. You want to fabricate a financial collapse and go present yourself to your children as a ruined man. Do you understand the variables here?" "I understand them, Dad. That's why I need you to help me control them." We went through it carefully. A story that was believable because it happened to real people every day. A business partner embezzling funds over 2 years. The company leveraged in ways I hadn't known about. A collapse that came fast and took everything with it. My actual CFO was in on it. My actual bookkeeper was in on it. We constructed paper trails that would hold up to a skeptical eye. Frank made me agree to check in by phone every 24 hours. I agreed, knowing I probably wouldn't always remember. The transformation took 10 days. I stopped shaving. I let my hair go. I sold the BMW and drove a 15-year-old Ford I borrowed from one of my foremen, a man named Dale who had worked for me for 18 years and knew exactly what I was doing and why. I moved my watch, a Rolex Patricia had given me on our 25th anniversary, into a safety deposit box and replaced it with a cheap Casio from a drugstore. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror the morning I was ready to begin, and the man looking back at me was someone I almost didn't recognize. He looked defeated. He looked old in a way that money had been concealing for years, and the fear in his eyes, the fear of what he was about to learn about his own children that wasn't a performance. That was completely real. I called Nathan first. "Son, I need to tell you something. Something bad has happened." My voice broke on the word bad, and the breaking wasn't manufactured. I explained about the embezzlement, about the company, about the accounts. I told him I had lost the house in Scottsdale, that I had been staying at a budget motel for the past week, that I had about $900 left to my name. I told him I just needed somewhere to stay for a few days while I figured out my next step. There was a long silence. "Dad, that's a lot to take in. When did this start?" 3 months ago, I said. I didn't want to worry anyone. I thought I could fix it. I couldn't. Another silence. I could hear him breathing, hear the faint sound of a television in the background. "Dad, the timing here is genuinely terrible. We're in the middle of a product launch at work and I'm putting in 70-hour weeks right now. Claire has her hands full with the boys. We just don't have the bandwidth to take on a house guest right now." Even he paused on the even, as though catching himself. "Even family. I want to help you. Let me send you some money. Will that help?" I told him money wasn't what I needed. I needed a place to sleep. I needed to be around people who knew me. I heard him exhale. I heard the television go quiet, as though he had moved to another room. "Dad, there's a really well-reviewed extended stay hotel near my office. Let me book it for 2 weeks and cover it. That gives you time to get sorted without disrupting everyone here." I said I understood. He seemed relieved by those 2 words. He sent a Venmo notification for $1,500 13 minutes later. I stared at it for a long time. $350,000 for a house down payment. $1,500 for a father with nowhere to go. I drove to Bellevue anyway. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The house was everything I remembered from the photos he had sent when they moved in craftsman style, mature maple trees out front, a 3-car garage. Claire's minivan was in the driveway next to Nathan's Tesla. Through the front window I could see lights on in the kitchen, the shape of movement, the ordinary life of a family that had room in it for everything except one more person. I rang the bell. Nathan opened the door and his face did something complicated. "Dad, I told you I know," I said. "I just needed to see you. I've been sleeping in the car, Nathan. I can't sleep in a motel right now. I just need a couch." One night, he stepped partially out onto the porch, pulling the door mostly closed behind him, the way you do when you don't want the people inside to see what's happening outside. His voice dropped. "Dad, Claire's parents are here. They fly home Sunday. The boys share a room and the guest room is taken. I physically don't have a bed to offer you right now." I looked at him. The son I had watched be born. The boy who used to fall asleep on my chest watching baseball. "I just need a couch," I said again. He rubbed his jaw. He went inside and came back with an envelope. "Dad, there's $500 in here. Go to the hotel tonight. I'll call you next week when things calm down. I promise." He pressed the envelope into my hands and held the door open. Not for me, but against me. In the gentle, polite way of someone ending a conversation. I heard the deadbolt turn from the inside. I sat in the borrowed Ford in front of my son's house for 20 minutes. The kitchen lights stayed on. Nobody came back to the door. The flight to Chicago felt like traveling through somebody else's life. I had forgotten what airports felt like when you weren't in business class, when the gate agents looked through you instead of at you, when the overhead bin space was already full by the time you boarded. I wore the thrift store clothes I had found in a Goodwill near the motel, and I carried a duffel bag with 4 days of belongings. Diane's house in Naperville was the kind of place that belonged on the cover of a catalog. Stone facade, 3-car garage, professional landscaping. I had helped with the down payment. I remembered writing that check, feeling proud that I could give my daughter something solid to build a life on. The irony of standing outside it with a duffel bag and $900 was not lost on me. She answered the door herself. She was wearing yoga clothes and her hair was perfect at 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday. "Daddy," she said, and her eyes moved from my face to my clothes to the duffel bag in a single quick scan that she tried to disguise as concern. What happened to you?" I told her the same story I had told Nathan. The embezzlement, the collapse, the $900. I told her I had been to Nathan's. I told her I needed somewhere to stay. She did not open the door wider. She stood in the doorway, and her arms crossed slowly, almost without her noticing they were doing it. "Daddy, I don't even know what to say. This is a shock. I need a minute." I waited. Behind her I could hear the sound of the house, the hum of a high-end kitchen appliance, the distant sound of a television. "Can I come in?" I asked. She glanced back. "Greg works from home on Thursdays," she said, as though that were an answer. "He's on calls all day. He's very sensitive about disruptions when he's working." "I'm your father," I said. "I have nowhere to go." She closed her eyes briefly. "Let me talk to Greg." She stepped back inside and pulled the door to. Not all the way closed. I could hear the low exchange of voices. Greg's voice had a flat, carrying quality, the kind of voice that has never had to soften itself for anyone. Diane came back. "Daddy, Greg thinks it wouldn't be a good idea for you to stay here right now. He says it's not about not caring. It's just that we have the Henderson dinner on Saturday and the Martins are coming the week after and the timing is just..." She stopped herself. She went somewhere deeper in the house and came back with an envelope. "There's $2,000 in here," she said. She had written it in cash, which told me she hadn't wanted Greg to see it on a card statement. "That ought to cover you for a couple weeks at a hotel while you figure out next steps. There are some good transitional programs through the county, too. People who specialize in exactly this kind of situation." She reached out and touched my arm. A brief, careful touch, the kind you give someone whose situation might be contagious. "I'll call you next week," she said. "Daddy, I love you. I really do. But we just can't right now." The door closed. I stood on the front step of the house whose down payment I had written by hand, holding $2,000 in an envelope, listening to the sound of my daughter's life resuming on the other side of a door she had locked. The drive to Tucson from the Phoenix airport took a little over 2 hours. I had taken the cheapest flight I could find and driven down in the borrowed Ford. And somewhere around Casa Grande, the weight of the previous 4 days settled onto my chest like something physical. I had been held at arm's length by both of my oldest children. I had been handed money the way you hand a stranger on a street corner, something to make them go away. I had stood at the threshold of houses I helped build, and been told, in the most civil possible language, that I was not welcome inside them. I almost turned back twice. Not from fear of what Kevin would do, but from something else, the fear of what it meant that I was hoping. I had not hoped the same way for Nathan or Diane. I had driven to their houses already half knowing. But I was driving to Kevin's apartment because some part of me believed, and I was terrified of learning I was wrong. Kevin's building was a 2-story complex near the Rincon foothills. The parking lot had a few cracked spaces and a dumpster that needed emptying. The exterior paint was the faded beige of something that had been nice 20 years ago, and maintained since then more out of necessity than pride. The number on his door was a 7 that had lost its screw on one side and hung sideways. I knocked. I heard movement inside, then the sound of the door unlocking, not a deadbolt but a simple knob lock, the kind that doesn't slow anyone down much. Kevin opened it in a t-shirt and jeans, holding a red pen, a stack of papers under one arm. His face moved from surprise to alarm to something fierce and immediate that had nothing calculated about it. "Dad?" He stepped forward without hesitation, not back. "What, come in? Come in right now." "What happened? Are you hurt?" He had his hand on my arm before I finished crossing the threshold. The apartment was small and warm. A couch with a blanket folded over one end, a coffee table with papers, and a half-finished mug of tea. Photographs on the refrigerator, Kevin and Rosa, at what looked like a national park. A picture of me and Patricia from 15 years ago that I hadn't known he had kept. A bookshelf overloaded in the way of people who actually read the books. It was the smallest place I had been in 20 years, and it was the first place in 4 days that felt like somewhere a person actually lived. "Sit down," Kevin said. "Are you hungry?" "Rosa made green chile stew. There's plenty. Sit." I sat. I told him the story. The same details. The embezzlement, the collapse, the motel, the $900. I told him about Nathan. I told him about Diane. Kevin's jaw tightened when I got to those parts, but he didn't interrupt. He waited until I was done. Then he said, "You're staying here. That's it. That's decided. You're taking the bedroom. Don't argue." I told him I couldn't do that. He shook his head in a way that reminded me of Patricia. That particular expression of his mother's that meant the conversation on this subject was over. "You're my father," he said. "This is our home. That means it's yours too." End of discussion. Rosa came home from her shift at 10:30, still in her work shirt, smelling like the store. When Kevin explained, she put her arms around me without a word, just held on for a moment. Then she said, "I'll make up the bedroom, and I'll call into work tomorrow morning so I can take you to get some things. We'll figure this out." I spent the night in their bedroom. Their sheets smelled like laundry detergent and a faint trace of Rosa's perfume. On the nightstand was a library book Kevin was reading and a photograph of their wedding. I lay in the dark and thought about Nathan in his Bellevue house with the Tesla and the 3-car garage. I thought about Diane in Naperville writing $2,000 in cash so her husband wouldn't see it on a statement. I thought about lying in this narrow bed while my youngest son slept on a couch in the living room of an apartment he and his wife rented because a teacher's salary and a grocery store salary don't buy you much more than that in Day Tucson, and he had put me in his bed without a second's hesitation. I don't know when I fell asleep. I do know that I woke up at 2 in the morning to the sound of voices in the kitchen. The walls in that apartment were thin. I lay still and listened. It was Kevin and Rosa speaking quietly, the way people speak at 2 in the morning when they think everyone else is asleep. Kevin was saying, "The truck's got about $11,000 in value right now." Rosa was quiet for a moment. "That's your truck," she said. "I know," Kevin said. "But if he needs medical evaluations, neurological stuff, and he doesn't have insurance right now, that's going to add up fast." A used car lot on Speedway will give me cash in 2 days. Rosa said, I can pick up 2 closing shifts a week. Melissa offered to swap with me. Between that and what I have in the savings account, we set aside for the roof repair. She stopped. Kevin, she continued. He went to Nathan first. He went to Diane. He trailed to their houses, and they handed him envelopes. She said it quietly, but I could hear what was underneath it. She said, Your brother has a house your dad bought him. Your sister had a wedding your dad paid for. And they gave him cash like he was a stranger. Kevin didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was the quietest I had ever heard it. I don't understand how you become that, he said. I genuinely do not understand the process by which you look at your own father. Someone who gave you everything, and you see a problem to be managed. I don't understand that. I have made furniture out of Dad's advice, Rosa said softly. I knew what she meant. Kevin had told her things I had said to him over the years. Things I didn't know he had been carrying. We figure out the money, Kevin said. We always have. His voice settled into something quiet and certain. I'll call the dealership in the morning. Dad needs us right now. That's all I need to know. I lay in their bedroom and I wept. Quietly, into a pillow that smelled like their laundry, in the dark of a too-small apartment in Tucson, Arizona. I had spent $350,000 on Nathan's house, $240,000 on Diane's wedding, $48,000 on Kevin's degree, and my youngest son was lying on a couch in his own living room talking about selling his truck so his broke father could see a neurologist. I called Frank at 6 the next morning, standing on their small balcony in the pre-dawn cool, watching the sky go orange over the rincons. It's time, I said. He knew what I meant. At 9 o'clock, a black SUV pulled up in front of the apartment building. Kevin was in the kitchen making coffee, still in yesterday's clothes, when I knocked on the door frame. I need you to sit down, I said. I need to tell you something. Rosa came in from the bedroom. They sat together on the couch, his hand finding hers the way it does when people have been in the habit of each other for a long time. Frank came through the door with his associate, briefcase in hand. I stood in front of my son and his wife and I said, Everything I told you was a lie. Kevin went very still. I never lost the company. Richard Holt didn't steal from me. I constructed that story with my attorney over 10 days because I needed to know something. I had been sitting in a 5-bedroom house in Scottsdale for 6 years, alone, writing checks to my children whenever they asked, and I realized one night that I had no idea who any of them were when the money wasn't on the table. So I took the money off the table. Rosa's hand had gone to her mouth. I went to Nathan's house in Bellevue, I said. I stood on the porch of the house I bought him and told him I had nothing left and needed a place to sleep. He gave me $500 and suggested a hotel. I went to Diane's house in Naperville. I stood at the door she opened with her husband's money behind it and told her the same story. She gave me $2,000 in cash. So Greg wouldn't see it and told me about county transitional programs. Kevin was looking at the floor. His jaw was working. Then I drove to Tucson, I said. And you put me in your bed. When I said that, Kevin closed his eyes. I heard you last night, I said. I heard you talking about the truck. He looked up. His eyes were wet. Dad, he said. And that was all he said for a moment. Frank stepped forward. He explained in his careful legal voice that Mercer Development Group was currently valued at $78 million, that I had spent the previous 3 weeks restructuring my estate with the assistance of 2 financial planners and an estate attorney, and that the documents in front of them represented the result of that restructuring. Kevin and Rosa would receive $51 million in trust, along with full ownership of Mercer Development Group, which would be transferred into a family trust in Kevin's name. The company would continue to be managed by its existing executive team for a transitional period, with Kevin taking as much or as little operational involvement as he chose. Nathan and Diane would each receive $9 million. These inheritances came with conditions: 1 year of family therapy, 80 hours of community service with organizations supporting elderly and homeless individuals, and a written letter not to me, but to Kevin and Rosa acknowledging what had happened on the days I came to their doors. Kevin was shaking his head slowly. Dad, I can't. He stopped. He looked at Frank, then at me. I don't want the company. I don't know anything about running a company. I'm a teacher. I know you are, I said. I moved to the couch and sat down across from him. Kevin, you are the best person I know. You know that? I've known a lot of people in 70 years. I have sat across tables from men who ran companies worth 5 times mine. I have shaken hands with people whose names you'd recognize. And I am telling you, as honestly as I have ever told you anything, that you are the best person I have ever known. Not because you were going to sell your truck, because you didn't think about it for 1 second, because the only question in your head was how to take care of someone you loved. That's not something you can teach. That's not something you can buy. I paid for Nathan's house and Diane's wedding trying to buy it, and I got 2 envelopes for my trouble. Kevin put his face in his hands. Rosa put her arm around him. You don't have to run the company, I said. Keep the management team. Draw a salary if you want or donate it if you don't. But I need you to have it because you are the only one of my children who understands what it's actually for. It's not for houses and cars and Hampton Lake houses. It's for this. For moments like last night, when someone you love has nothing left. It's for being the kind of person who doesn't have to think about what to do. I also need to tell you something else, I said. Frank, go ahead. Frank pulled out a second set of documents. The apartment building Kevin and Rosa were currently renting from, I had purchased it 2 weeks prior. Their rent was now 0, and attached to those documents were the keys to a house in the Sam Hughes neighborhood, 4 bedrooms, a yard large enough for whatever came next, paid in full. Rosa made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Kevin looked at the keys for a long time without touching them. Dad, he said finally, I would have sold the truck. You know that, right? I know, I said. That's the whole point. He stood up and held on to me the way he used to when he was small, not the careful, obligatory hug of a holiday or a farewell, but the way you hold something you thought you might have lost. I held him back and I thought about Patricia, about what she would have said about all of this, about whether she would have agreed with what I had done or whether she would have had something better in mind all along. I thought she probably would have. 2 years later, I am sitting at Kevin and Rosa's dining room table on Thanksgiving. The house in Sam Hughes smells like roasted green chile and something sweet Rosa's mother brought from Albuquerque. The table seats 12 and we have 14 people trying to fit around it, which means 2 TV trays in the corner and nobody caring. Nathan is here. He came from Seattle with Claire and the boys, and over the past 2 years I have watched something happen to my oldest son that I did not expect. He got quieter. Not in the way of a man who has withdrawn, but in the way of a man who has started listening. He coaches his younger son's soccer team now on Saturday mornings. He calls me on Tuesday evenings without an agenda. Diane is here too, sitting next to Rosa's mother, swapping recipes for something involving red chile. Greg is in the backyard with Kevin, talking about the raised garden beds Kevin built in the fall. Greg has surprised me. He is not a warm man by nature, but he is a man who respects honesty when it costs something, and the letter he wrote to Kevin and Rosa, which I was not supposed to see but did, was 2 pages of handwriting that clearly cost him a great deal. Diane volunteers 2 Saturdays a month at a senior center in Naperville now. She called me last spring to tell me about an 80-year-old man there named Herbert, who had reminded her of me, and she cried a little on the phone, and I didn't say anything about it because sometimes you let people carry things in silence. Kevin's 4th grader Marcus, the boy who struggled with reading, is doing well. Kevin mentioned it at dinner and then said nothing else about it. That's how Kevin talks about the things that matter to him. Briefly, clearly, without needing the moment to be bigger than it is. Before we eat, Nathan stands up. He does this at every Thanksgiving now, this ritual that none of us planned and all of us have come to need. He waits for the room to quiet. 2 years ago, he says, my father drove 1,400 miles and knocked on 2 doors, and at both of those doors he was turned away. He was turned away by me. He was turned away by Diane. He came to us with nothing, and we gave him envelopes. He clears his throat. I have spent 2 years understanding what that says about who I had become. I don't have an explanation that makes it make sense, because I don't think there is one. I had everything, and I gave him envelopes. He looks down the table at Kevin. Then there was Kevin. he says, who had almost nothing and gave him everything, who gave him his bed and stayed up until 2 in the morning figuring out how to sell his truck. Nathan pauses. I am still learning from my little brother, he says. I expect I will be for a long time. He raises his glass to Kevin, to Rosa, to Dad. The table follows. Someone's elbow knocks a glass of water. Rosa's mother says something in Spanish that makes Kevin laugh. Emily, Nathan's youngest, demands to know when the pie is. The ritual dissolves back into the beautiful, normal chaos of people who have decided to be a family. Later in the evening, after the dishes and the card game and the children eventually herded toward sleep, I sit on Kevin's back porch. The desert sky is enormous and full of stars, the way it always is in Tucson on clear nights. Kevin comes out with 2 cups of coffee and sits in the other chair. Do you regret it? He asks. He's asked me this before. I think he asks because the answer changes slightly every time and he's paying attention to how. I think about the 2 envelopes, I say. The $500 and the $2,000. I think about Nathan's deadbolt and Diane's careful cash. I think about lying in your bed, listening to you talk about your truck at 2 in the morning. No, I say. I don't regret it. Kevin nods. I should have known sooner, I say. That's what I regret. I spent 40 years writing checks and calling it love, and I let it go on so long that 2 of my children forgot which one was which. That's on me as much as it's on them. Kevin is quiet for a moment. Dad, he says, you came here. You could have driven anywhere. You came here because you knew something. Even before you rang the bell, you already knew. I look at my son. He is 38 years old. He drives a truck that is now 13 years old because he looked at the new model and decided the money was better spent on his classroom's book budget. He has the same unhurried quality he has always had. The quality Patricia used to call his superpower, the ability to be completely present in whatever moment he's in. Maybe, I say. Inside the house, I can hear the low sound of Nathan and Greg talking about something. The sound of Diane laughing at something Rosa's mother said. The sound of a child settling in sleep. I think about Patricia, about the pool she wanted, about all the evenings I sat alone in a house built for more than one person. I think about that Tuesday night in October, when I sat at a table built for 8 eating reheated pasta, and I understood for the first time the difference between what I had accumulated and what I had built. My name is Harold Mercer. I built a company worth $78 million. I also spent 30 years confusing provision with presence, and I nearly lost 3 children to the distance between those 2 things. But standing in my youngest son's doorway with nothing in my hands, I finally learned what my wife already knew and had been trying to teach me from the beginning, that the only measure of a life that survives you is the people who would have stayed if you had never been worth a dime. If this story has moved you, I ask 3 things. Tell me in the comments about someone in your life who showed up when it cost them something. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to this channel, because these are the stories I am here to tell about fathers who are still learning, about children who still have time, and about the quiet, difficult, beautiful work of becoming worthy of the people who love us. Because some lessons only arrive after you have stripped everything away, and some people, it turns out, have been gold the whole time. You just had to stop buying things long enough to see it.